So something that I realized very, very recently in my life, I was probably maybe 2 months ago, maybe even less than that. So for most of my life as a man of faith, I always had a lot of knowledge. I consider myself a student or an amateur student of theology. I've read my Bible multiple times. Like I said, I've spent countless hours studying scripture, studying, different cultures within the Bible, different Bible characters, just, from A to Z, you name it, I've probably looked into it. So I had a lot of knowledge. I had a lot of, academics under my belt as far as the faith is concerned. And for many years, I prided myself on that. I thought that somehow, or not even somehow, but I defined my faith by my knowledge. And knowledge, I do think knowledge is part of the equation. I think it's part of, it does have merit. But I realized one night very recently that I always had a lot of knowledge, but I didn't have a lot of grace, right? I lacked grace for me and for other people. One of the reasons that the Pharisees were who they were, right? The Pharisees had a lot of tradition, they had a lot of knowledge, they were very puffed up, right? They were smart guys, right? They knew their stuff. But because of their egos, because of their traditions, because of how puffed up they were, right? They thought they checked all the right boxes. And unfortunately, for a long time, I did the same thing, right? And it's not even so much that I thought I checked the right boxes, because I understand there's a lot of things in the faith that have a lot of wiggle room, but I was puffed up. I prided myself on my knowledge, right? All that knowledge and all that theology I had gained over the years. And of course, I'll still study theology. I'll still be a student of theology, a student of the Bible, student of the faith for the rest of my life. I don't think we should ever stop learning. But I learned recently, and I tell you, it hit me like a truck. I was just sitting there one night, and it just popped in there, and nothing short of revolutionized my perspective. And I just realized that, for so many years, I had all this knowledge, but I just didn't have a lot of grace. So now that's what I focus on, be gracious to people, the same grace that Jesus gives me every single day, I have an obligation to pay that forward to other people, day in and day out. It's as simple as I can put it. There's no other way to put it, It keeps me from acting like a Pharisee, or at least mimicking that Pharisee type behavior as I see it. But I realize that, and I'm realizing more how important grace actually is. Grace really helps keep me centered. Grace really keeps me grounded. But I've got to make sure that I recognize my fallibility first. Every morning, every day. Recognize that I'm just as fallible as everyone else. I don't have all the answers. I don't have it all figured out. Just try to stay humble, and whether it's an attitude of grace or whether it's Pharisee behavior. I think that most people in the church, we have moments of both of these. I got to be careful though not to act not to act puffed up perpetually, right? I think we all have moments of that, No, what I should do is learn to be gracious perpetually. Now, I never will. Nobody's going to do it perfectly. No one's perfectly gracious except for Jesus himself. And I need to learn to rest in God's grace, not just pay it forward to others. For so long, and not all the time, sometimes, some days, some chapters of my life were better than others. Jesus talks about, coming to him, taking things to him, right? His burden and his yoke is light and easy. And from my perspective, a lot of that has to do with accepting and taking on and believing and resting in his grace. It doesn't mean that I need to abuse grace or, If I have certain struggles in my life, I don't need to add to them, right? I don't need to fall into the trap of hyper grace. But just rest in grace. Just realize that God's grace, right, has always been present, and to pay that grace forward to other people. Because I really think, humility might follow a close second, but I think being gracious to people is one of the best ways, one of the greatest ways to look like Christ, to be conformed to Christ. And Scripture tells us that we need to be conformed to Christ, and I think a big part of that is learning to be gracious to myself and to others. There's a lot more that could be said about this. I'm actually writing a book about grace at the moment. It's just something that I've learned very recently, that I've really cultivated and I've really internalized in my life, just how incredibly important grace is, right, to a maturing Christian, to walking in the faith. It's a great, we talk about being salt and light of the earth, I think grace plays a big part in that. So for now, it's about all I got at the moment, but I would encourage anyone, we need to learn to be gracious, right? With ourselves, with other people. Recognize our fallibility first. Recognize that we're just as human as everyone else. And, we have to remember grace is unmerited favor. Nobody deserves grace. Neither do I. Take care.